The phrase Pirates of the Caribbean, to today's generation of young people means the magnificent Walt Disney film Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and its 3 sequels with the magnetic actor Johnny Depp playing the role of the swashbuckling Jack Sparrow, and all of the romance of Disney World with its ghost ships and ghosts and phantasmagoric creatures of the deep. $4 billion worth of fantasy, romance, and imagination. The phrase pirates in the Caribbean, to my generation, meant the famous bands of Caribbean pirates or buccaneers of the early 18th century, mostly English but also French, Spanish, and Dutch, from Sir Henry Morgan of Barbados and Jamaica, and Calico Jack Rackham, to the gentleman pirate of Barbados himself, Major Stede Bonnet, and the famous female pirates Anne Bonny and Mary Read. But the title of tonight's lecture, Pirates and the Caribbean, is intended to be a broad historical sweep from the earliest days of shipping of ancient Indian, Chinese, and Mediterranean piracy through the so-called golden age of Caribbean pirates to today's explosion of piracy in the Indian Ocean, as our chairman said, off the Horn of Africa and the coast of Somalia and elsewhere. It's intended not just to recall dramatic stories of piracy and the supposed romance and affecting today almost every nation, but especially our own sordid Caribbean history, not romantic at all, but to bring us all up to date with modern piracy and its similar sister, armed robbery on the water, and the threat that this all poses, and to alert us to the real risk of a new age of Caribbean piracy, and to discuss whether, as your chairman said, we are prepared to deal with it if it should occur. Let's begin with the etymology or origin of the word and a definition of its use today. It comes from the Latin pirata, which means a sailor or a sea robber, and the Greek pirates, a brigand or a pirate. Note that definition, a brigand or a pirate. Literally, it means one who attacks, from a Greek word pairan, to attack. It was in 1701 that it was first used also to mean taking another person's work without permission, as people so commonly do today with music and videos, and of course do so outside the law and get away with it. The free online dictionary defines a pirate as 1, someone who robs at sea or plunders the land from the sea without commission from a sovereign nation. If there was a commission, he's called a privateer, and it's kind of legal in times of war. 2, one who preys on others, a plunderer. 3, one who makes use of or reproduces the work of another without authorization, which we just mentioned. And 1 who operates an unlicensed, illegal television or radio station, and it was first used in that sense as far away as 1913. And this online dictionary defines piracy as a warlike act committed by private parties not affiliated with any government against other parties at sea. The term applies especially to acts of robbery and criminal violence at sea, and people who engage in these acts are called pirates. Close quotes. But the International Maritime Organization restricts the term piracy to such acts on vessels in international waters. If committed in territorial waters, that is within a 12-mile limit of the coast, it's simply called armed robbery. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982, piracy consists of any criminal act of violence, detention, rape, or depredation committed for private ends by the crew or passengers of a private ship or aircraft on the high seas against another ship or aircraft, or against persons or property on board a ship or aircraft, these definitions, of course, being legal, have to belong, and in a place outside of the jurisdiction of any state, that is, in international waters and not in territorial waters, unquote. And here I must point out that in spite of the fabulous song by the Merry Men, Sam Lord was not a pirate, except in the general term. He was perhaps a major scamp. He may have raped one or two people. He clearly was dishonest, and he certainly may have robbed, but he was not a pirate by today's or most definitions. But as a result, by these international definitions, acts of a similar aggressive and criminal nature don't get recognized, often don't get reported, certainly not included as acts of piracy. And it is said that many such acts today are simply not reported in order to keep insurance costs down. So it's a little bit like the underreporting of crime in Barbados, perhaps. But the term can also be used sometimes to include acts committed on land or in other major bodies of water, or even on shore or very close to shore. And in discussing this subject of my lecture with a number of people over the last few weeks, many people have quipped that Barbados is full of pirates who are brigands, using that definition, committing acts of piracy in this fair land of ours and very much on the land. So let us not be too straitjacketed by the United Nations definition. The word is used in many much wider ways. It connotes a degree of criminal behavior that is criminal behavior wherever it occurs. But we will focus mostly on piracy at sea. And I'd like to start with ancient piracy. And the fact that the word goes back to the ancient Greeks and Romans shows that piracy is as old as the hills, you might say, but really back to the earliest days of shipping. And it's been experienced in every part of the ancient world. It was prevalent across the Mediterranean more than 3,000 years ago. The Phoenicians, who invented the alphabet and who populated the land of Canaan at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, today's peaceful land of Lebanon, controlled trade on the southern coast of the Mediterranean, but they're also pirated and are said to have specialized in kidnapping young boys and girls to be sold as slaves. In the 1st century BC, there were many pirates who threatened the trade of the Roman Empire, and Cicero called them enemies of the human race. Apparently, Julius Caesar himself was kidnapped by pirates. According to Wikipedia, when the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of gold, Caesar, always thought to be a modest man, is said to have insisted that he was worth at least 50. It is reported that when the ransom was paid and he was released, he immediately raised a fleet, captured the pirates, and crucified the lot. It is even reported that when the Romans were occupying Britannia, St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, was captured and enslaved by Irish pirates. So if you wish to be canonized, volunteer to your nearest pirates. In the Middle Ages, Viking pirates, and when the Moors were expelled from Spain, Moorish pirates took on the practice of raiding and wrecking, and they were the notorious pirates of the Barbary coast of North Africa. And according to the Encyclopedia of Piracy, there's an encyclopedia of everything, corsairs, who were both Muslim and Christian seafarers in the Mediterranean, attacked ships of the opposite religion, capturing the opposing crew and selling them into slavery, or ransoming the wealthy like Julius Caesar 1,000 years earlier. So there's really nothing new under the sun. History simply repeats itself. Piracy in India, in the Persian Gulf, and in Madagascar plagued shipping in those waters for hundreds of years, and Japanese and Chinese pirates ruled the waves in Asia. When shipping to China became a very big deal, the Strait of Malacca between the peninsula of Malaysia and the island of Sumatra became the main shipping route between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, linking east with the Middle East and the West, and a major target, therefore, for pirates. And today, over 50,000 vessels pass through the strait every year. So you can imagine what a simple target it is for the pirates. About a quarter of all oil carried by sea passes through the strait. mainly from Persian Gulf suppliers to the Asian markets. And in 2006, an estimated 15 million barrels a day were transported through the strait, simply waiting on the pirates. But as we've said earlier, when you say pirates, people think of pirates in the Caribbean. So what was the big deal about the Caribbean, and why do we have such a name for piracy? Well, after Columbus, the Spanish claimed the New World for themselves and all of the lands of the Caribbean and the Americas, and they tried to deny the right of any other country to enter their space. The other European countries never accepted this, of course, and they sent their ships to plunder the Spanish. And we all know the stories of the English heroes we learnt at school under Sir Alexander Hoyas, the stories of people like Sir Francis Drake and so on. And these operators were known as privateers, but after the end of the long war of the Spanish succession, many pirates came into the Caribbean because they were no longer working for their respective royal navies. They needed something to do. They had ships. What could they do with them? They became pirates in the European theater of war, and by the middle of the 17th century, pirates in the very real sense were rampant across these regions. First, the buccaneers, a French name, a French term meaning smokers of meat because of their habit of barbecuing the meat that they ate from capturing the wild animals. Using Port Royal in Jamaica as a base, the French island of Tortuga off Haiti, and New Providence in the Bahamas. There were several thousand pirates in the end of the 17th century and the early 18th century. But I just want to say a bit about three of the most famous men: Sir Henry Morgan, Blackbeard, and Major Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate of Barbados. And in case you think only men can be such wicked enemies of the human race, well, I'll say a word about two notorious female pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. First, Sir Henry Morgan. As Warren Alleyne says in his wonderful book, Caribbean Pirates, Henry Morgan would have bitterly resented his inclusion in any book on pirates, because he regarded himself as a buccaneer and a patriotic man at that. He lived first off his wits, and then he attacked only the ships and the settlements of the enemy, chiefly the Spanish, never the English. He was a Welshman, believed to have come from Bristol in February 1656, bound for Barbados as an indentured servant at about the age of 21. But instead of accepting his fate as a freed indenture and struggling to live on an acre of rocky land in St. John or St. Joseph in the Scotland district, he somehow found himself on a ship and went to Jamaica. Now, you will recall that Penn and Venables, their expedition sent by Cromwell to sack Panama in 1655, but when they reached Barbados, the watering hole of all the English ships crossing the Atlantic, they refitted and they took on so much new hot rum known as Kill Devil and so many rascals on board that by the time they were halfway across the Caribbean, they decided that this motley crew of drunken sailors was totally incapable of sacking Panama, and they were in danger of going back to England and losing their heads at the whim of Cromwell for failing on the venture. So, rather than risk being beheaded, they decided to capture Jamaica, which was a poorly defended Spanish settlement at the time and easily captured. Cromwell then sent Barbadians to govern and settle Jamaica. And I always tell my Jamaican friends, any Jamaican friends here? No? Okay. But I always tell my Jamaican friends, don't be too troublesome or we'll come capture you again and send you another Bajan governor. But it was in that period of populating Jamaica with Anglo-Bajans that Morgan found himself in Port Royal, described shortly after that as the most wicked city in the world. His name was made as one of the three leaders of an expedition into Nicaragua, capturing the Spanish city of Grenada. In 1666, the governor of Jamaica, the Bajan, Sir Thomas Modiford, sent a man called Edward Mansfield with Henry Morgan as his vice-admiral out from Port Royal to capture the Spanish island of Santa Catalina, or Providence. Now, Providence is just a small little island in the Gulf of Mexico, and you would wonder why it was so important, but it was a very strategically placed island, rather like Barbados to the rest of the Caribbean. Mansfield mysteriously disappeared, and Morgan replaced him, and you may speculate as to how and why Mansfield might have disappeared in view of Morgan's succession to the admiralty of that fleet. In 1668, the buccaneers were again commissioned by Governor Modiford to carry out reconnaissance of Cuba. They captured and sacked Cagame and went on to Portobello in Panama. Amazingly, this army of 400 buccaneers overcame the forts of Portobello. I have no doubt that the Spaniards were drinking their own liquor, because it's just astonishing that 400 disorganized buccaneers with no military training could overcome forts. But they did, and one of their ploys was that they first captured the monks and nuns in a monastery and a nunnery, and they made the monks and the nuns scale the ladders first, so that they were shot down first. But after a fortnight of rioting, revelry, and debauchery, as Warren Alleyne puts it in his book, Morgan returned to Jamaica with a fantastic reputation. And my Jamaican friends have always been full of admiration for such performances. In 1670, Modiford commissioned him again, this time as Admiral and Commander-in-Chief of all of the ships of war of Jamaica, and authorized him to attack the enemy both at sea and on land. They set out for Panama. Amazingly, they captured Panama City. Allegedly, they set it on fire, tortured citizens, and carried away a hoard of money, jewelry, gold, and valuables. It also seems that he shared very little of the booty. He double-crossed most of his buccaneer colleagues and returned to Jamaica with his very closest friends in just 3 of the fleet. He and the governor were then sent to England and tried for fighting the Spaniards after the war had apparently ceased by treaty. But he was able to prove that he knew nothing of it, and he was in fact rewarded by King Charles II with a knighthood. So Sir Henry Morgan then returned to Jamaica as the governor. So from indentured servant to pirate to to governor. Forgive that slip of the tongue. Paradoxically, he then set about suppressing buccaneering and piracy as completely as possible in the next decade with a very heavy hand. There were to be no more pirates under his rule. And he lived out his days in Jamaica with great wealth, reputedly dividing his time between church and bottles of rum. Hence, of course, the famous Captain Morgan rum, I suppose. Not a very good rum. Then comes Edward Teach, alias Blackbeard. Like Morgan, he came from Bristol too, and he served in privateers operating out of Jamaica and New Providence in the Bahamas. He sailed with a pirate called Hornigold. That sounds to me like a fictitious name, but I have not been able to confirm that. And Hornigold put him in charge of a French ship that they captured and then turned pirate hunter himself. He got a pardon, went back to the Bahamas, and became a pirate hunter. Teach armed a ship with 40 guns, called it Queen Anne's Revenge, and promptly attacked an English ship, plundered her, set the ship on fire, and sank her. So he started his piracy career in a big way. He then embellished his reputation with a long black beard, braided into pigtails and tied with ribbons, a fashion we sometimes still see today on the beaches. And perhaps it's the inspiration for some of the bizarre headdresses we still see. And he would lead an attack on another ship with fuses of hemp tied to his hat, which he then lit. Hemp burns slowly, as those who smoke it would know. And so his head was then wreathed with smoke. And as Warren Alleyne puts it again, it was hardly surprising the crews under attack could hardly resist when they saw this gigantic 6-foot-plus satanic-looking figure wreathed in smoke charging at them with his cutlass. Blackbeard then met up with Major Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate of Barbados, with a crew of 70 on a ship called the Revenge, a ship which he himself bought in Bridgetown, hired a crew, and went a pirating. Who was this strange man, a major in Barbados, who was surely the most notorious Barbadian of all time, no matter what you may think of some of the people you currently know. Well, he was born the son of a planter at Bonnet's plantation in St. Michael, known as Upper Bonnet's, in 1688, in the house where I now live quite happily. He was baptized at Christ Church, Parish Church, where my wife and I worship. But there the connection between Bonnet and I actually end. Some years later, the Upper Bonnet's plantation's name was changed, perhaps because of the embarrassment of the later owners to be associated with the name Bonnet, and it was changed to Upton. Now, I confess we've never found any pirate's treasure in our garden, although my brother did find a beautifully preserved mid-17th century clay pipe lying on the grass in perfect condition one day. But there's no record of Bonnet actually bringing his booty back to Barbados. I know that Bobby Morris suggests and has suggested that Bonnet was perhaps a privateer and had a way of getting his booty to Barbados to be sold with great profit for him and his friends, and that perhaps even the friends might have assisted in buying the ship. But it does seem from the records of Bonnet's piracy that most of his activity was conducted off the coast of the eastern seaboard of the USA. Now, Bonnet was in fact orphaned at the age of 6, and I can only suggest that maybe being an orphan at the age of 6 and having no father figure might have contributed to his wayward ways, as we believe happens today as well. But he inherited the plantation. He lived in Bay Street with his wife, Mary Allenby. And what kind of a person she was, we're not sure, but you're all familiar with the Barbadian proverb about not being caught in the hands of the Allenbys. I think they were the people who were supposed to be money lenders. They had 4 children, and apparently his son Edward's granddaughter, a lady called Anne Clark, became the wife of a very famous and rather more honourable Barbadian, the General Robert Haynes of Newcastle, the long-serving Speaker of the House of Assembly. Now, as owner of more than 100 acres, Bonnet automatically became a major in the island's militia. And it is said that although he was a bookish man and a justice of the peace and well-to-do, he went pirating at the age of 29. Some said because of a nagging wife, but that could not be. And as the author Charles Johnson put it in his book of 1724, a general account of the robberies and murders of the most notorious pirates, Johnson said perhaps he fled from, and I quote, discomforts found in the married state. I don't know if anyone has any idea what they could be, but who knows. A London cartoon at the time showed him fleeing a fusillade of crockery hurled by an irate wife, and other illustrations have shown him in the flamboyant gentleman's dress of a dandy of those days. But to everyone's surprise, he bought himself this sloop secretly, named her Revenge, hired a crew, armed her with 10 guns, and sailed secretly out of the Bridgetown harbour. The only pirate or buccaneer known ever to have bought his own ship and to have paid his crew a wage. His career was short, but certainly eventful. In spite of his novice status as a seaman, he met with immediate success. He captured and plundered several ships off Charleston, and as 2 of them were Barbadian vessels, he took the precaution of burning them so that word wouldn't get back to Barbados. So he covered his tracks. He soon met the arch-pirate Blackbeard, and strangely enough, these 2 completely different people became partners, a most unlikely pair. But Blackbeard eventually took over Bonnet's ship and made him virtually a passenger or a guest cruising on board his own ship. Some cynics might see similarities with today's cruise ships, but I won't go there. Eventually, Blackbeard betrayed Bonnet, and he absconded with their accumulated plunder. But Bonnet got back on his feet, or should I say, on his ship, and in 1718, having taken more than 28 vessels and counting in less than 2 years, in the late summer of 1718, he was captured by Colonel William Rhett in Charleston. He escaped briefly, perhaps because he was imprisoned at the house of the Provost Marshal of Charleston, who happened to be a Barbadian, Nathaniel Partridge, and you know, blood is thicker than water, and he was allowed to escape. But he was recaptured, and he was tried by Chief Justice Nicholas Trott in one of the most famous trials in American history. Trott read him a famous marathon harangue of 6.5 pages, laced with biblical quotations, admonishing him that as a gentleman, a man of fortune and a man of letters, how could he be an enemy of mankind, a common robber and a pirate? So he was condemned to death and was hanged on the 10th of December 1718. He wrote the judge a long letter pleading for clemency, pleading desperately for clemency, but this was refused. And eccentric to the last, he died hung, apparently clutching a bouquet of flowers. A gentleman indeed. He was buried at what is now Battery Park on the shore of Charleston and is commemorated by a large monument there inscribed to the notorious gentleman pirate. A photograph of my co-author of the book, The Barbados-Carolina Connection, the historian Warren Alleyne, standing next to the monument adorns the back of the book's first edition. Bonnet's name survives in Barbados in the heavily populated district of Bonnets, which was Lower Bonnets, Britain's Hill, and in the names of residents there, although they're all spelt with 2 T's. And now the tale of a slip of the tongue, a tale of 2 ladies. Pirates, if you will call them ladies, as murderous vagabonds and licentious ladies as you can find in the history of the world. The notorious Anne Bonny and Mary Read. A Charleston writer called Mark Jones, the author of a book called Wicked Charleston, The Dark Side of the Holy City, describes Blackbeard and Bonnet as the odd couple. This gentleman pirate and this heavily bearded madman. And he describes Anne Bonny and Mary Read as the odder couple. And theirs is a hair-raising story, and I'll tell you why. Anne was the daughter of an Irish lawyer and his maid. It happened back in Ireland too. He came to Charleston and became very prosperous, as many adventurous lawyers might. But Anne, his daughter, was a tomboy with a ferocious temper, who by 16 started hanging out on the waterfront, hooking up with a different sailor every night, according to legend. She drank, she cursed, and she fought like a man. And she married a pirate sailor called Jack Bonny, hence Anne Bonny, at which her father disinherited her, and she, not unnaturally, attacked him with an axe and burned down the family house. They fled to New Providence, the den of pirates in Nassau. I hope it's not still a den of pirates, where she shared a bed with a pirate captain called Jennings and his mistress Meg. She then became the mistress of one Chidley Bayard, the wealthiest man in Nassau, and then later the mistress of Calico Jack Rackham, a pirate famous for his colorful manner of dress and adornment. These were the early days of bling. Bling is no new thing. Anne and Calico Jack sailed the seas around Jamaica, plundering, killing, and capturing. One prisoner was a handsome pirate named Mark Read, who caught Anne's eye and replaced Calico Jack in her bed in the captain's cabin. But it turns out that Mark was really Mary. And there hangs a long, long tale, no pun intended, much too long for tonight. Anne and Mary were lovers and pirating partners for the next couple of years, but in 1620, a British man-of-war captured them and took them to Jamaica, where they were tried and sentenced to death by hanging. They pleaded their bellies. That is to say, they pleaded that they were pregnant, presumably by their shared lover Calico Jack, but who knows? And they were proved to be pregnant, and so they were granted clemency. Mary died of fever in prison, and Anne was paroled by her ever-forgiving father in Charleston. She returned to Charleston, completely reformed, married a Charleston businessman, and gave birth to 8 children, dying in 1782 at the grand old age of 84. So if you want to live long, go to sea.